there's a rigidness to it, but also there's a flexibility to it as well. Podcast, you pretty much can just go, but if something happens, then you don't have a show.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Trash, and stand back with another interview. This time, I'm joined by Josh Nason from the Wrestling Observer and Limitless Wrestling. So welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing? Glad that we make this happen again.
So am I, definitely. So if we take this back to the beginning, where do you first discover wrestling as a fan?
I first discovered wrestling, I think it was like, I'm going to date myself here, but like 1987, WWF Superstars of Wrestling. It's on a UHF station way back in the day. UHF station being, I did use foil and rabbit ears, for those people who have heard those terms before. I lived in an area we didn't have cable or anything like that. So yeah, I that's how I discovered it. It was on Saturday afternoons, like around noontime, and that was my gateway in. And yeah, all these years later, still watching Men in Tights.
Yeah, definitely. So what era are we? I know it's like 1987, but was it WCW or Jim Crockett, or was it WWE?
Oh, WWE. Yeah, that was the only option that we had available at that time, because that was the only thing that, with the very limited options that we had network TV wise, that was it. So it was WWF for Superstars of Wrestling, and then also Saturday night's main event, because we got an NBC station. So when that came on, that was big as well. So yeah, those are my gateways. So WCW really didn't come into my kind of orbit in terms of like watching until like much later. When I go like a friend's house, I would have cable or something like that. It was kind of one of those deals. And then much later, we finally got like a giant what they call C-band satellite dish. That was when kind of the world opened up to me in the 90s with ECW, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, more WCW, USWA, everything from all over the place. I was able to get access to, and that really helped kickstart things quite a bit.
You talked about the world opening up to you. How do you feel like your wrestling fandom would be different if you were able to access things at a younger age, like a lot of younger fans are now? Do you think you would be more of a fan if like you had the internet at your fingertips like we do now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wonder how social media would play into it, because I would hope, obviously we didn't have, I first started watching, the internet wasn't a thing. And it was just the limited access you had were like wrestling magazines and that type of stuff in terms of any discourse and things like that. I mean, I think I would be very similar to, a lot of fans today, where they're just trying to take in as much as they can. I don't know if I would have burned out from it because of that. My current day, I like a lot of different things, which makes when I watch wrestling more enjoyable, because it's not the only thing that I watch. It kind of helps. It helps give me a little bit better perspective as well. So yeah, I don't know. I felt but when we first got the satellite dish, which basically helped us get more and more stuff, I couldn't get enough of it. So I would assume that I'd probably be very similar. And then after a while, kind of find what I really liked, what I didn't like. And then my hope, if social media was around back then, I hope I would not be one of these, the extremes, the fringe fans who likes to hate on everything, or just constantly, chide people and do all this stuff. That doesn't seem much fun, but that would be my hope anyway. But I would expect I would watch a lot. Because obviously I couldn't get enough back then. So yeah, that'd be my guess.
You talked about not getting enough back then. When you are able to consume all this wrestling, how much does it take over your life? I imagine it's quite a bit.
In terms of like today?
No. Back then, when you first got the satellite dish.
Oh my God. Yeah. It was really late at night stuff. And I would tape stuff on, of course, on like VHS. We didn't have, DVRs way back then. Right. So I would just fill up tapes. When when I was younger, I would have two VCRs and I would rent stuff from the video store, like your pay-per-views that'll come out, your WrestleMania, SummerSlams, all that stuff. Because I didn't have any access to pay-per-view. So I'd get this stuff months and months and months later. So all the Coliseum video stuff, when I could go rent it, I would. And then but I would essentially what they call dub them. So I would record from one VCR to another on a tape. I had so many different tapes of stuff, and I would just be able to go back to it anytime. That was like my on demand. But yeah. And so when I got a little bit older and we got satellite dish, it was the same thing. I was taping stuff. Most of the stuff that I would get will be like in the overnight. There was a network called America One, I think, that would have like generally wrestling from, especially on the weekends, from like 10 p.m. through like 3 a.m. or something like that. And of course, I would stay up late. But other times I was just like, I can't make it to, watch a 2 a.m. USWA show. I would just save it for tomorrow. So I would just tape stuff and watch it. But I would take in, it was a lot of stuff on the weekends. And then, again, like WCW and stuff like that, I would just record and kind of just watch when I could. And again, when you're a kid and, you don't have the internet or things like that. And it was a lot easier to find time to watch it, put it that way.
Definitely. How does your fandom then change? You talked about it being easier as a kid to watch stuff. How does your fandom change as you get into adulthood and you have responsibilities?
Yeah, it's a lot different. Through college, that was the Attitude Era when I would just go into college. Attitude Era, so the Monday Night War and all that good stuff. I got out of it. Going into that, there was a stretch in like junior high and high school where I kind of just got out of it because it really wasn't cool, and I was in other sports and all that. And then when I get into college, I kind of get reignited because people were really interested in it. My friends were interested in it. And so it made it easier for me to remain interested and not have to try to hide it, because people are like, oh, this is awesome. And you would get to, I'd watch, Raw on Mondays with my friends. Well, downstairs in my room, I'd be taping Nitro to watch later on because a lot of the guys didn't really care about that as much, but I did. But it was kind of fun to be wrapped up in that. As it goes through adulthood, it really just, as I try, again, it's really just my interest level, right? If somebody was interesting, I would find time to watch it.
Yeah.
As the last, couple decades of WWE went on, I kind of get less and less interested in WWE and more interested in everything else kind of going around it. And you just find matches to watch. And even now, it feels like it's nonstop when it comes to stuff happening, no matter where it is. And again, writing for the Observer and the great staff that we have with our editors, and Joe Courier is leading our group, Brian Rose, Ethan Renner, Ian Carey's coming along. That day, guys handle day to day. I mean, we always talk about that. It never stops. So now it's I don't have to watch as much, but I still keep up on it. But like I generally watch like my AEW stuff, select WWE stuff, the WWE pay-per-views and when those happen, and then usually a lot of like key matches that are interesting. I don't get to watch as much like New Japan stuff as I'd like to because I don't really have access to it. And I also like watching things on my TV, not on my laptop. Yeah, that's just kind of a personal thing. But yeah, there's so much great wrestling out there compared to when I was growing up, that now it's trying to find, okay, what if I have X amount of time in my day, what am I going to spend watching? And usually it's just select matches versus like long shows and things like that. But with YouTube and the ability to fast forward through stuff, it's makes that a lot easier to do.
100%. So you brought up there writing for the Wrestling Observer. How do you connect with the great team that are over there? How do you connect with the Wrestling Observer crew?
Sure. Yeah, it was I think it was around 2010 to 2011. I was,
oh wow.
Yeah, it was. So I've been writing I'd done a lot of UFC writing. I've been doing that since like 2005, UFC and MMA, and that's kind of how I got back into the writing game. I was writing through college and then kind of get away from it and then got back to it after watching The Ultimate Fighter after Raw, of all things. That's when I was watching Raw pretty religiously back in the early 2000s. And I remember sitting on my couch and I was listening. It was a subscriber at the time, and Brian Alvarez did a show about MMA with Conan, of all people. And I thought it was just really interesting because, again, always hear Conan talk about wrestling, but he was really into other stuff. And so I emailed Brian and said, you should think about doing like a separate MMA show, just MMA with Conan. I think it'd be kind of interesting to listen to because you don't get that a lot of other places. And then, so I think he knew who I was or something like that. He's like, well, we should do something together. I was like, okay, we can do that. And then that's how it started. And so he and I started doing a show, and we started like interviewing different fighters and things like that once every like couple of weeks or so. And then I eventually got access to the back end of the website and to be able to help post shows and things like that. And I just saw an opportunity, like there was just a lot of like bad headlines and posts that really weren't fully written. Dave Meltzer is legendary for back in the day for a raw rating was and then the headline and in the body of the post be like 3.9, and that was it. No context, no nothing. And so I'm like, I think this could be better. And so I had a day job, and I said, well, at night when I had no family and nothing like that, I was living by myself. And I said, well, when I get home at night, I was going to fire up the laptop and I'm just going to start cleaning this stuff up and adding things to it and just kind of see where it goes. And then that kind of helped was my gateway to be more of an editor and writer for the site back then.
You talked about Dave Meltzer's legendary headlines. Did he have a reaction to you cleaning? You said cleaning them up, so I'll use that. Did he have any reaction to that at all?
I don't know if he did. I don't know. I'm still here, so there's clearly no objection back in the day. Really, a lot of it was just adding more context and making it more internet friendly. Yeah. And make it more readable. I think that's probably the biggest thing is, someone can see that, but what does that mean? What did it do? What did ratings do the week prior? There's a lot of things too, where he would send in things he would just copy and paste like emails and columns from people, and they weren't formatted right. And so I cleaned that stuff up, and eventually, I got to be trusted to the point, based on my background, that I was able to say, well, maybe this writer, there's a better way to do this. Maybe this columnist isn't really right for us, or can we get standards? And it took a long time, and there's always going to be growing pains as you go. But I think the site got to be in a much better place and was allowed us to eventually bring on other people and just kind of help pave the way, I think, for a better way of doing things, which we're constantly improving on now. And I think we're at a really good spot.
You brought up some writers maybe not being up to a standard or not cutting it. Have you got any stories of like, I really like this person, but unfortunately they're not right for us? Like, have you got any stories like that?
I mean, I think every website does to an extent. You work with writers and you work with people that it just depends on kind of what they want out of it, right? We have a great group of writers now. Our TV writers are great. Again, our editors, who I talked about a minute ago, that do a majority of the writing, and myself, I think we do a really, really good job. Those are good guys, and especially Joe with adhering to standards and things like that has been awesome. But yeah, back in those days, it was tough because we'd have people like, well, I just send my stuff into Dave and he posts it. Well, to me, that wasn't good enough. I wanted it to be, is this better? Basically to ask questions and engage like any type of editor with us. Like I was trained when I went to school for journalism way back in the day. And, some things like, does this even fit our audience? I was very careful with some of the MMA stuff because, to me, the name on the marquee says pro wrestling, right?
Yeah.
Now, as the majority of our audience came in. So I kept thinking, how do we best serve that audience? How do we best make sure that what they're coming for is there? Is this stuff copy and paste from other websites? There's all these little things. So, eventually some writers kind of fell off, and that's fine. I think we got to a better spot, but yeah, there's always going to be some friction when someone new comes in, and they're the people who are used to having no barriers then have barriers, and they have standards. And then after a while, those people either adhere to the standards and are willing to work with you, which some did, or some are just like, this isn't, I'm just not interested in doing this way. And I'm always interested to see if those people end up writing for other websites. That was
Yeah.
my big thing as well. And I always try to encourage people, like, even if it doesn't work here, like, there's other websites you can work for. There's no shortage of them. And a lot of them just didn't. They just wanted to write for our website and that was it. And, we have to have standards, we're expected to, and, but that was a long process back in the day, but I think it got to a much better spot that we're in now.
Sounds like it, definitely. So I should have done this in chronological order. I do apologize, but
That's all right.
What did you learn when you was doing a show with Brian? What did you learn when it came to podcasting or doing a show in general that that you use in your current work when it comes to podcasting?
I think the big thing was just reps, right? Because I mean, the interviews are interviews. I had done hundreds of interviews before I even started doing any podcasting stuff, because just for the writing aspect. So how to talk to people. It's a lot different now because more people understand what video podcasts are, audio podcasts, and they kind of you kind of get like how to have a conversation, right? Or what you're looking at the camera, not being distracted by this, whatever. And so that it was interesting because we didn't do any video. So he and I'd be doing Google Chat to have some sort of smoothness. We'd say, you go for 2 questions, I got to follow up, let me run with this for a bit, that type of stuff. So you had a little bit of cadence there, which is a little bit of a challenge when you have, 2 people talking to a certain subject, and you can't see them and you can't see their person. So those are good. I think trying to find interesting subjects. Again, we're talking to MMA fighters and so on. So I tried to find people that would be relevant to our audience. There'd be some interest there. If they were newsworthy, and then also there was some sort of pro wrestling hook, I would find a way to get that in there so we could learn some stuff about that. Like Daniel Cormier, we had on once. That was really good. I think it's just trying to make it interesting. But in terms of what we learned, I think obviously, confirming with people before, that is always good. Learning how to work through technical issues. I was also doing a radio show at the same time for an ESPN affiliate in New Hampshire. So we did interviews there. It was kind of getting through the cadence. So pretty much I just tried taking as much as I could and then learn about things and try listen back stuff, try to get better, take feedback from people, and kind of just go from there. Yeah.
I understand what you're saying completely as a podcaster myself.
Yeah.
So when it comes to when it comes to doing your radio show at the time, I know you was talking about reps there and stuff. What were some of the differences you noticed when it came to radio and podcasts? And then what were some of the similarities?
Yeah. So the radio show, so I had a producer there, which is good. It was also a friend of mine. So yeah, it was the ESPN MMA show. We did, done Thursday nights for about 2 years, give or take, way back in the day. And so you have breaks. So we would set up stuff ahead of time with the podcast. For the most part, you may have certain things that you're going to hit, but in an interview, you're just talking, right? I mean, you have certain things you want to get to, but you're having a conversation like we're having now. And I didn't have and most of the time, generally, we have half an hour, 30 minutes, or, this could be a longer one. Do you say, yeah, maybe about 40 minutes or so, give or take, and we'll kind of go from there. So there's no shortage in time. When you're doing radio, obviously you have this time to this time, and you have certain breaks along the way. And I think doing that by myself would have been difficult. I think having a producer that could say he as we're going through a segment, we're just talking about fights or whatever, and he could be like, he'd just signal like this. That would allow me to, okay, we got 1 minute. I know I'm not going to go into a long diatribe here. I just need to be able to set things up. In the interviews, generally we knew we'd have a 12-minute block, give or take, or maybe even shorter. And also we could always cut an interview short if we needed to. So we knew that, the person with the fire we were interviewing wasn't that interesting as we thought it was going to be. They may be having issues or problems along the way. We did one was a fighter named Melvin Gillard, who was fighting in the UFC at the time. And he took the call from a golf course that was very windy, and it was a struggle to get through it. I think we made it through about 5 minutes. the audio was just bad, and we were able to call it good. And we just kind of, laughed about it on the air afterwards. Like those things happen. But with that, you're able to cut it short. If I'd done that on a podcast, it would have been like a super short show, So just there's a rigidness to it, but also there's a flexibility to it as well. Well, podcast, you pretty much can just go. But if something happens, then you don't have a show. So there is obviously differences. But at the core of it, it's still conversation, right? I mean, that's like the big thing. If you're able to talk and you're able to good at it and you're able to work at it and put in the reps, typically things are good and you're happy with the end product.
Definitely. So I was trying to find the segue there, but I really struggled. But how do you connect with Limitless Wrestling and start working with them?
Sure. Yeah. So Limitless, I went to a show. So the owner, Randy Carver. So let me kind of backtrack. So where I live in the U.S., I live in New Hampshire, which is in up northern New England. So I'm from Maine originally, and I'd heard somewhere along the way this Maine independent group named Limitless, and I saw they brought in really interesting names, and they had been in operation for I think about 4 years up until that point, may have been 3 years, and I'm like, I gotta check these guys out. I'm like, oh, they run shows in Portland, which is only about an hour or so north from here, place I visit a lot, and so on. So I'm like, so I kind of got the idea because knowing the area, I want to do something for my podcast, and I said, well, I want to talk to the owner about what it's like to run an indie, bring in bigger names like he was doing, and be able to do it in an area that's not exactly known as a hotbed of indie wrestling. And so he and I connected, and I got to know his story, and I just kind of stayed connected to the world, so to speak. I went to as many shows as I could as a paying fan, and then I was on they have a podcast that they did at the time with Randy and John Alba. John Alba, I was pretty well known and so on in our space. And I went on that show a couple times. I filled in a couple times. And then as we kind of went, I got to be more and more friendly with Randy. And then when John had to leave the podcast, do other professional commitments and so on, I reached out to Randy. I said, I'll take this over for him if you want to do this. Because obviously I have the experience with it. I know the product. If you're interested, and he's like, yes. And so we kind of just started from there. And yeah, I'm like not a paid employee by Limitless at all. My time is volunteer time, so to speak, but I enjoy it. I really do. It's fun. I used to work in the indies way back in the day. I was a ring announcer back in like 2000, 2001. Yeah. And it for a promotion in Maine called the Eastern Wrestling Alliance. And there's just something about it. It's, I don't get too soapboxy, but like, it's pure about it, and it's kind of like it's fun to see it. It's a well-booked promotion. It averages about 450 fans a show, which is really good for this area. It's on IWTV, and there's just opportunity there. Randy does a good job with his booking. It's not a case of just spending $25,000 to bring in every single name from the outside and just put on a show. He builds from local New England stars. He brings in people from the outside when it's the right time to do it, and it's often a couple of names per show. But he works them in a way that doesn't feel like like some of these other indies out there just bringing a bunch of names or like a fair show.
Angle, for example.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, and he just comes in. And, he brings in guys, and he's also one of the things that I really have noticed about Randy and really kind of enjoy from him is he knows when to bring in young talent and when to really kind of push them along. Christian Casanova, who became Carmelo Hayes obviously in NXT, he was a guy that came along at the right time. Anthony Green, who was called up or get signed by NXT and had a short run there, but is really well regarded in the business. Gave him a big push there. And then recently, Alec Price. So Alec Price is getting a lot of run on GCW shows now. He was doing some great stuff in the indies before that, but really got the run in Limitless. Again, Randy would bring in talent from the outside, and Alec would just keep knocking it out of the park and just really help kind of develop his thing. So kind of seeing the young talent, seeing kind of who could be next is really awesome to see. And it's Yeah, it's a labor of love. It's not a huge commitment time for me, but it's I don't know, it's a promotion I just enjoy. Randy's super smart. He's really young too. His story is like unbelievable, and basically started the promotion with his graduation money from high school.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and he just kind of just built everything along. And then finally his turning point was having Zack Sabre Jr. versus Chris Hero, a match you can watch on Limitless Wrestling's YouTube page in Orono, Maine, which is where I went to college. Orono is a very, very, very small town. And he was able to bring these guys in and have this banger. And he's like, I think this is really a viable thing. And all these years later, here he is doing great stuff. So it's fun to be part of. I love being part of it.
You talked about there how much you obviously enjoy it, and you can hear the passion in your voice when it comes to that. So, but I am curious to know, how did doing the Limitless podcast help you as a creator, or change you as a creator when it came to your Wrestling Observer work?
I don't know if it really did as much. Well, being more in tune with the indies, I think, has helped me, just because if names get called up, names get obviously, we cover pretty much the entire business, but all of a sudden you'll see a name get popped in, say like for example, MLW has a event coming up this month, I think, and like Delmi XO is challenging Taya Valkyrie for the featherweight title, and most likely will probably win it, given that Taya Valkyrie is now with AEW. But Delmi works in Limitless, and so I've seen her come along, and so it's like, okay, I kind of have a background with that. When Carmelo gets signed by WWE, I knew kind of the story because I talked to Carmelo, was on my podcast way back in the day, but I've also kind of seen him work. So it's helped in those areas, in that I'm able to kind of like see some of these talents come in and see them in front of 400 people versus 4,000 people. And you really kind of get, to me, like a better sense of who they are. You also kind of see who's next. In terms of the podcast, it's completely different because it's more promotional in nature. Like we're not really talking too much about the business, even though we do talk about like, kind of breaking the fourth wall stuff. We talk about if shows are good or not good. We're not like ripping on individual talents if they have a bad night or something. But one of the things I will ask Randy is like, tell us how the show went up. And there was times that there was an issue with the ring. We talked about that could have threatened the show. There's a power outage at the venue that could have caused like a major catastrophe. You had to consider potentially canceling a show. Travel issues, like he'll talk about, I remember, was it Bear Country, I think, who's the Iron Savages in AEW now. They had flown to Boston. There was travel issues. There was flight delays trying to get them to the venue. And like, he's like, well, we had to move this around the card and kind of do this and this. And he'll talk about that and trying to say like, kind of really let the fans in on terms of how things kind of change behind the scenes. And you don't really see it in front of the scene. The house never sees it. But to me, that's fascinating because, if a show turns out good, no matter how big or small you are, if a show turns out good, you never see the stuff that goes on, all the chaos that can go on behind the curtain, the things you can't control. And I think that's the stuff we try to bring to the fans. But also, most of the talk is more promotional in nature and so on. But it's fun. It's a different gear, but it's a fun gear.
What is your preparation period like? Not period, but like preparation for getting in the zone to do a podcast. Do you have like any rituals that you were like, I know I'm going to be on a podcast, so I need to get in the right frame of mind to do that?
Yeah. So for my podcast and the Observer site, Josh Nason's Punch Out, I do. So I'm so much different because I don't do like a weekly show or really even a bi-weekly show. I try to do them every couple of weeks, even though I've taken a few months off. I do things that I try to do things that are different. Because there's 1,000 podcasts that do the same
Definitely
thing. They cover Raw, they cover SmackDown, they talk about Dynamite, they talk about this, they recap, and we have a lot of them. Everyone seems to have one at some point in terms of like a website or a media network, whatever you want to call it. So it's like, well, I could do that, but I don't want to because they exist anyway. So I try to do more interviews. I'm trying to do that more now. but with specific people that I think might be kind of next up in line, so to speak.
Yeah.
People that I've seen in person talking about, the limitless stuff, people I've seen in person that just seem to have something, or like areas that we in wrestling fandom take for granted that exist, but we don't really know like the full story of. So I'll reach out to some of these organizations or some of these entities and be like, yeah, I want to tell your story. Would you be interested in coming on? We'll talk about that. So preparation wise, depending on the show, I don't like with the interviews, I have certain beats I want to hit, but I don't like do every single question out, because you could ask someone something and you're like, oh, I didn't know that. And then all of a sudden you veer off here. And I think sometimes people kind of stick so much to a
I
script, they
did
miss
that in
some of
my
it.
early interviews.
Yeah, everyone does. Everyone does, because you want to make sure you hit the beats, and that again, that's kind of part of getting the reps. But yeah, in terms of so that's kind of how Josh Nason Punch Out goes. Like I did one last week with Jesse Collins from WrestleNomics and Voice of Wrestling. I knew there was like specifically 4 things I wanted to talk about, but all I did was literally just list them out in my notes. And I knew what I wanted to talk about because I thought about it. Saying as I think about questions a lot in my day here, or if I go to walk or something like that, or driving around, I sometimes will think of like, I'm interested in knowing more about this. And if it kind of sticks in my head, I need to kind of get that out. With the Limitless show, Randy will send me a rundown of all the, we're going to talk about this. And I kind of format that myself. And then I just kind of go with it. So there's not a ton of prep. I think, if you're asking someone to be in a show, you kind of have an idea of what you want to talk about anyway. With a Limitless show, again, there's certain things we have to hit. There's a show coming up on Saturday. We know we want to go over the main card for this and do a quick preview. We know we got to hit the results of the other show. And then we also got to do, here's a couple news and notes from talents that maybe like working elsewhere or all this different stuff. And then we usually hit that and wrap it up in between, 35 to 50 minutes, depending if we start talking. So everything is different, but I think as long as you're kind of like, if you're invested in your show and you know what you want to talk about, you don't have to do a ton of prep. At least that's not what I have to do. But some people are different, video podcasts and things like that. That's a lot different as well. Some people they have to worry about is StreamYard working right. Do you have to do this? Do you have to do this? Anything. So I haven't made that move to video yet, but someday that might happen, but there's a lot of prep that I don't know if I want to do. I kind of just like having the audio version. We'll see.
I understand.
We'll see.
So, but what about yourself as a person, I suppose? Do you have to do any prep to get into performance mode, or like, is the way I'll phrase it, how we always say that like people are, when they're on camera, they're themselves turned up to 11. How do you get yourself turned up to 11, or do you have to?
I don't think I do. I think kind of what you see is what you get. I think that there are some days I'll have something lined up. If I'm doing a podcast interview or something like that, where I have to get in the zone of really wanting to do it. Like sometimes I'm like, okay, I got to do this thing at 2, and you kind of think, oh, I have all these things I have to do in my other work day or whatever. And I'm like, okay, I don't really get excited until like an hour before. And when I say excited, like kind of like, all right, we're kind of getting into it. Like, we're going to do this, make sure I have all my notes. I've already confirmed with the person that they're going to be able to make it. And just kind of go over that stuff. And then once we kind of hit record, we talk for a few seconds before, my thing is, all right, it's go time. And then it's on me to really get into it and be invested. Because if I'm not, then I want, if I'm interviewing a wrestler or an executive or something like that, I want them to feel like this isn't just a cookie cutter interview. And, I'm going to ask, oh, where was your, where'd you learn about wrestling, or, where'd you go to wrestling school? If they've done interviews before, especially I'll try to listen to a little bit of them, just going to get an idea, but I don't want to do the same interview everyone else does. So I have specific things I want to ask, but I'll also kind of try to find some interesting facts about them, or something that they talked about on Twitter to kind of disarm them from the start. So that's kind of my process. And then, but it's usually like an hour or so right before I'm kind of like, all right, if I'm asking them to spend their time, I have to act like I'm interested in investing in this. And that means I got to do my homework and do all that. If I can do that, and hopefully at the end of the like, oh, this is a good interview, this is good talk, then I've won the day, so to speak. And that, of course, listeners have to like it too. But the subject matter, the person you're talking to me, that matters the most first, for sure.
Mm. What about calming down might seem like the wrong word, but what about after the interview? Do you have to do anything to go back to? I call it civilian life, but I know what I mean.
Yeah. Um, Not really. No, I kind of like just the way that my day is structured depends on, do I have to pick what time the interview takes place? Do I have to, do I have to pick up my kid? Do I have another work call right after that? So I try to schedule it where I have a little bit, at least of some, a little bit of come down time after it. But usually it's like, literally, an interview ends. I'll just literally just grab my laptop and go right to the next thing. I'll post the podcast the next day, give or take. And that's kind of how I do it. So I mean, once it's over, I'm kind of just like on to the next, on to the next thing. And, that's kind of what it's like when you're, have a kid and married and a real-time job, couple jobs, all that type of stuff. Yeah, it all depends on the day. But yeah, I have a little bit of come down time after.
Fair enough. So, as we look at wrapping this up soon, because I do want to be respectful of your time, we're going to do a segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know this is where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay per view, favorite wrestler's theme, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler of all time. Basically, questions that Josh might get asked on social media quite regularly. So now he'll have a place to be like, look, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's your favorite match of all time?
Oh boy, that's such a good question. I'm thinking through this. I'm thinking all WWE stuff first. I'm thinking of stuff that made me feel good, which was Hogan Andre in Mania 3. This isn't high work rate stuff. Hogan Warrior WrestleMania 6. I think of Rock and Austin at WrestleMania, the last one.
Mm.
I think of like CM Punk versus John Cena at the SummerSlam, the SummerSlam, the one when he took the belt and took off. Think of Undertaker Punk. Boy, how many Undertaker Mania matches? That's the thing. It's so hard because there's so much good stuff and just how you feel about in the moment. It's all WWE stuff. I mean, there's some great AEW stuff, but it's not so far in the rear view that you feel the kind of the nostalgic feel about it, like going back to things and things like that. I would say it's all Mania moments for the most part for me. And of course, again, like you mentioned, like Punk and Cena, just because that was such a scene. I think of the time that Cena went to the ECW pay-per-view, if Cena wins, we riot one, and what a moment against Rob Van Dam that was. I don't have, it's hard to say a favorite match. I think I just have favorite moments, and your favorite moments, Hogan and Rock in Toronto. Ooh. The stuff where you see the fans and they're so into it. And that's the thing I miss so much about like that Attitude Era. And when it's cool to see like the other night with Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens when they hugged and everyone just goes crazy. That's what it's all about. It's like it's so much great in-ring stuff. It's like when you see the fans actually get into it there, that's a moment. That's a thing. And for so long we haven't got to see that often. And that's what's great about Mania. It's what's great about those big moments. That something's working. So yeah, it's a very long-winded answer. I don't know if I have a singular match, but I have lots of moments that really just that I will always remember for sure, and many more I'm sure I'm forgetting. Yeah.
Fair. What about your favorite pay-per-view?
Favorite pay-per-view. I'm gonna go. You know what? I'm gonna say again, not a high work rate show. I'm gonna go with WrestleMania 4. And the reason I'm going to say that is because I was so excited about that tournament for the title.
Ooh.
And I remember I went to a closed circuit pay-per-view with my dad. So closed circuit was, So for those that don't know, closed circuits, you would go and they just literally show the pay-per-view. You'd go into arena, they'd show pay-per-views, and went to the Portland Expo. It was 1988. yeah, we just basically on a massive screen watched WrestleMania 4 and went through the whole tournament and all that stuff. And I remember getting it on a VHS tape after that, renting it, and it was 2 tapes. And I was like, oh my
wow.
God, this is so great. I don't have 1 tape, I have 2 tapes to watch. So I'm just gonna say, just for the nostalgia of going there with my dad, very unique experience. The fact there was a tournament for the title, the feeling when Hogan got beat, the whole Hogan Andre thing, because they wanted to clear the road for Randy Savage. I'm sure there's been great manias and great events along the way. I'm sure I'm forgetting and leaving out, but in terms of like, yeah, again, the way it made you feel in that whole moment, I just remembered that whole thing and really just loving it.
Favorite wrestler's theme of all time?
Oh, theme song? Oh, Steve Austin.
Hmm.
You don't beat when the glass breaks. It's that again. You talk about the people going nuts. It's so fun watching like these old clips, and then like there was one the other day that was on Twitter from Mick Foley was getting a beat down from The Rock and somebody else, and again they just wait and wait and wait, and all of a sudden the hits, and then everyone just goes ridiculous, and it's like that release of emotion and that anticipation. That's just, it's hard to beat. I mean, there's so many different good ones, but in terms of the pop when the glass broke, that's you can't beat it. You just can't.
I agree. I shouldn't say I agree because this is my guest list, but I agree. Favorite tag team of all time?
That's another great one. Oh boy, I would say 2 that are coming to mind are the Hart Foundation and the British Bulldogs. Again, my nostalgia for that 80s era. Demolition, I used to love a lot. It's got to be in that range because there were so many good tag teams. There were so different back in that day. And again, I didn't have access to WCW, so I didn't really get on the Midnight Express train, so to speak. Pun fully intended back until much later. I would say the Hart Foundation, but it's got to be. I'm going to say a 3-way tie between the Hearts, the Bulldogs, and Demolition. Just because they were so different and a lot of fun. I mean, you watch some of those Hart Bulldog matches now, and they're still really entertaining. I think there was a 2 out of 3 falls on Saturday night's main event that was really good. I'm sure they did a bunch of them, but that was those 3 teams, because they were so different, stood out to me. Again, much different work rate style, but yeah, those are 3 that stood out to me, I would say, gun to my head.
And then finally, who is your favorite wrestler of all time?
I mean, I think I have to go with Austin. He just the whole package, just the look, the demeanor, the angles he was in, he lived the character. It's so like so cliche to say, turning up to 11. That was something he said quite a bit, but he just was it, and was just, everyone just loved him. So good. Austin, Punk, I've always been a fan of. Just that whole kind of that anti-hero thing I thought was really good. I'll bring up another one that's probably in my top 5, is Taz. So,
ooh,
yeah, so
a
Taz
deep cut we don't get very often. So please explain.
So I when I was so again going through the C-band satellite dish era, I found ECW. I fell in love with it. It was so awesome, so great. Just a different feel of stuff, more adult, more more hardcore, but just more adult, and like is so much more WWE was offering at the time, and so on. And Taz was just this. He wasn't like a huge guy by any means, but he was just a badass. And the suplexes and just the way that Paul Heyman presented him. I remember like the angles with like 911 and former UFC fighter Paul Varlins. They made that into a big thing. And it was just so much. It was just different. And I remember when I also used to love Raven during that time, because that was a whole thing as well. But I think out of that whole ECW group, Taz stood out to me the most. And then when he talk about like a moment I'll never forget, and which is a top 10 for me, was when Taz made his debut at the Royal Rumble against Kurt Angle. What a moment. Oh my God. I mean, I think it was in
wasn't even
Madison Square.
alive yet, and I know I love that moment.
Oh boy. I think it was in Madison Square Garden, just him coming out, the heartbeat thing, and being Kurt Angle the way he did. I was just like, this is it, man. This is it. And of course, they just, again, Vince couldn't get over the height thing or whatever. He was just, he just had an aura and a presence. And I think people that see him on AEW TV now, yeah, it's much different. And people that watched him through TNA and WB and all, and when he's doing a commentary, and again to AEW now, he's so much different. You know, he doesn't have that same aura, but he also, it's a different persona, a different character. It's more kind of who he is. But back then, man, he was it. He was absolutely it. And I remember I was so disappointed when he didn't really get the WWE run to me that he deserved, because he was charismatic just by being a killer, you know. And that Rumble moment was just, it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. So one question you didn't ask me, I'll throw it here. I'll throw it out in the universe. He's my white whale in terms of an interview, is Taz.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I have asked, I have not got the okay yet. But someday it's going to happen. That's a guy I would talk to for an hour for sure. Cause I'm so fascinated by his career, his, guys that are able to stick around for as long as they do and work through different companies and things like that. And, the fact he has a son in the business now, there's a ton of questions there. So
I'd be fascinated.
Yeah, someday. He doesn't do a lot of them. I think that's probably by design, but one of these days, yeah, that's the one. That's the one I really want, and we'll get it done one of these days as soon as he says yes.
I hope so, because I would love to see you interview him, if I'm going to be completely honest. But the question that I end all my interviews on, Josh, as we wrap this up, is with YouTube, with podcasting, with social media in general, we're sort of going to live forever in some sort of very weird way. So what is one piece of content you want to be remembered for, and one that you're like, if you could scrub that from your mind, I would appreciate it?
I think the stuff I'm most proud of is I really kind of started doing them in the past couple of years, is the year in review wrestling series that I do, because no one does it like I do. It's 12 episodes covering every single month, and everything that happened. I go through a lot of painstaking detail in going through the list for every month, and try to get into some of the big things that happen. And it's fascinating to look back, because wrestling changes so much. We don't ever take a chance to look back and see what happened. It's always, what happened yesterday versus what happened 8 months ago. But this stuff, when we go through a series, when I record them in November, December, and we're looking back at, January, February, so on, you see like the pinnings of like something started here and it took a long time, and you finally kind of end up where you're supposed to be, or things we thought were going to be so big back 10 months ago and they fizzled out. It never happened. There was a rumor about this, or there was, whatever, and it just never happened. So, I think, as far as that would be one piece of content in whole, I would say, in terms of that, one that would go away. Boy, that's a good question. There's nothing that immediately comes to mind. Not say all my stuff's perfect, but it's I don't know. I think you try to do the best job you can in the time period that you're in. I don't think I've ever recorded anything that's too offensive or anything like that. But I think just because I'd had so much training going into stuff that I think I did the most professional job that I could. And I think even stuff that maybe not be that interesting, there was still, it was still professional or quality, I guess you could say. I don't, there's interviews. Yeah, some interviews you may want to have back. You may want to do things differently, but that just comes with experience level and so on. But nothing that really comes to mind that I want to scrub from existence or anything. Not yet. I'll knock on wood that doesn't happen. But that's what I would say. Yeah.
Fair enough. So as we wrap this up, where can the good people find you and all your content?
Well, of course, Twitter, everyone's favorite. Josh Nason, JOSHNASON is how to follow me there. Obviously, Wrestling Observer as well. Wrestling Observer, it's WONF4W on Twitter. And yeah, F4W online / WrestlingObserver.com. You check all our stuff there. Again, the guys doing a great job. Joe, Brian, Ethan, Ian, myself, our slew of army of TV writers, podcasters as well, and doing a lot of good stuff on YouTube as well. So you can check everything out there. And yeah, consider a subscription if you haven't already. And yeah, no money is tight, but certainly try us out. Especially we do sales twice a year with a month for $4 if you've ever been thinking about it. So those are going to be on the lookout for. And yeah, that's probably the best. Also, Limitless Wrestling, of course. LimitlessWrestling.com. You can check them out on IWTV. YouTube, they have over 1 million YouTube subscribers, which is incredible to me just because it's amazing that indie promotions are able to get that level of subscribers. So full matches like the Chris Hero, Zack Sabre matches on there. They have a ton of other stuff on there as well. And yeah, you can check out the Limitless Wrestling podcast. Just search anywhere for free, Limitless Wrestling. You can get the podcast there. It comes out about 3 times a month, give or take. And I also do Josh Nason's Punch Up for the Wrestling Observer website, which comes out whenever I have something good to talk about.
It's well worth doing, guys. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talk Trash. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talk Trash, and I will see you in the next video. A goodbye now.